Alright, I was planning on making a video on this topic at some point this year when I had downtime, but the news broke a few days ago, so I'm making it now. Brandon Sanderson announced that his books are finally being adapted after signing a deal with Apple TV. The Stormlight Archive will be turned into a TV show, and Mistborn will be adapted into feature films, with more projects likely to come in the future. And while my love for the Cosmere has waned a bit in recent years, I still absolutely admire Sanderson's work ethic and his engagement with the fantasy community, so I'm really happy that this worked out for him. But that leads me to the question, is a faithful adaptation of the entire Cosmere even possible? When I say the entire Cosmere, I mean the entire thing, like adapting just Warbreaker, or just Tress, or just Mistborn Era 1, easily doable. But what happens when you try to do all of it? See, Alan Moore, the creator of graphic novels such as Watchmen and V for Vendetta, is known for his dislike of adaptations, and he once said in an interview, adapting from one medium to another, there's no reason for it other than to make money. If something has sold well in one medium, let's make it into a film. But here's the thing, Sanderson is one of the most successful authors working today, so unless he has some crippling gambling addiction that the fanbase doesn't know about, he already has a lot of money. Most authors don't. Most authors, even the successful ones, don't make huge amounts of money. They might make enough that they can comfortably write books and not have a traditional day job, but if you want to own multiple yachts and rig elections, this might not be the line of work for you. I bring this up because there have been countless fantasy adaptations over the last 25 years, ever since Fellowship of the Ring and Philosopher's Stone proved what an absolute money-printing machine these can be. But of all of the books that have been adapted into movies and TV shows, how many of these have been great adaptations? Don't even think about whether it was a good movie or not. Did it adapt the book faithfully? Once the rights are in the studio's hands, they'll do what they think is best. Or worse, what the focus group says is best. The point I'm trying to make here is that any author who is negotiating the rights to their story with a studio, they have to know that there is a chance the studio will just railroad the story. This is why an adaptation of the Cosmere has taken so long, because Sanderson wanted to have creative control so that this would not happen, and he has the leverage in the industry to make that so. A struggling author might be nervous about selling the rights to their work, but once the executives dump a lot of money in front of them, they might give in. And I'm not blaming any author for doing this, because I'm self-aware enough that I would probably do the same thing. But Sanderson doesn't have that problem. Any money that Apple TV is going to give him is not going to be life-changing for him, so he doesn't need to settle for a shitty adaptation just to pay the bills. Which means he's going to work hard to make the adaptation as faithful as possible, and that brings me back to the original question. Is it possible? The first and biggest hurdle the franchise will face is just how much there is. As of right now, the Cosmere includes the Stormlight Archive, which is 5 books with another 5 projected, Mistborn, which is 7 books with another 6 projected, assuming he doesn't add another time period. Then there's 6 standalone books with a 7th coming out later this year, a trilogy of graphic novels, and almost a dozen short stories and novellas. So when we're thinking of what company would even be up for this task, I feel Netflix and Amazon Prime already fall out. I mean, Netflix has become synonymous with prematurely canceling shows, and I don't know why any author would work with them after their handling of The Witcher, especially given how that show's writers had open disdain for the source material. Meanwhile, Amazon's run of The Wheel of Time led to Sanderson saying, I won't miss being largely ignored. They wanted my name on it for legitimacy, but not to involve me in any meaningful way. Which honestly might be the most negative thing Sanderson has ever said about someone he's had to work with. So who else is there? I imagine Sanderson might have been hesitant to work with Disney, as their handling of Star Wars has been very inconsistent, and the MCU has been on an oversaturated decline for years now. And while I think HBO would have the resources to take on this project, I imagine they would have clashed with Sanderson creatively. Although I would absolutely have loved to be in the room when a suit from HBO tried to convince Sanderson that the Cosmere needed boobs and people saying fuck. So I guess that leaves Apple, and honestly, that feels like a good decision since their business approach for streaming seems to be quality over quantity, and now we can move on to the actual process of adapting the franchise. Now, I'll admit I was a little surprised that Mistborn is going to be a film series. The books are obviously too short to be full seasons of TV, but you could definitely get like a 4 or 5 episode run out of each one. Don't get me wrong, I think it could work, and it's a nice change in an era where a lot of stories are being stretched out. There is a world out there where The Hobbit was 1 or 2 great movies instead of 3 okay ones, and the Kenobi show cut out 4 hours of filler and left us with just the highlights. And given that this is on streaming, I don't see why a movie needs to necessarily be held back by its runtime. The issue here isn't the story. Mistborn's story is straightforward enough to fit into a movie, but if anything's going to be cut, it's going to be the lore. And if the movie was written by some guy that the studio found, they wouldn't see an issue here. But now Sanderson is going to be writing the script, and he might have to make cuts to his own world building. That brings me to an issue. I'm gonna say something that makes me sound like an elitist snob, but I don't care. People who read have a greater attention span than people who don't. You need to. Think about this. Do you have a show that you're really into that you watch with someone like your spouse or your parents or a few friends, and like they like the show and they watch it consistently, but you ask them to name 3 characters and you just get a blank stare? They probably just recognize the faces or the actors that play them. When you're reading, you don't have that luxury. Remember the names or get left behind. That's going to be a nightmare for the Cosmere, but I'm not talking about the characters, I'm talking about the magic system. Let's break this down. At the beginning of Mistborn, Kelsier explains that allomancy focuses on 10 metals that each grant different powers. Some people can use only one, a rare few can use all of them. Well, we soon find out that there aren't 10 metals, there are 16. Each one has a different power, each type of user has a different name. Now, if you're a lore expert, you probably have all of these memorized, but is the average person going to memorize them? I mean, you can remember some of them. There's a metal that pulls, there's a metal that pushes, and it's not hard to figure out that soothers calm people down and rioters rage bait them. But is a casual watcher going to remember all of them? Even a casual reader doesn't need to memorize everything because there's a periodic table of elements at the back of the book, but the show is not going to have that. And then it gets even better, because Mistborn doesn't have one magic system, it has 3. So each of the 16 metals actually has 3 different powers. And there is no easy solution to this. Sanderson's not going to revise his lore and cut out like half of the metals so there's only like 8 or something. He could just ignore some of them. After all, there are some that are used way less frequently than others. But if you look at the books, the Cosmere has become increasingly lore-driven, so I don't think Sanderson is interested in simplifying it. After all, does he need to pander to casual audiences? The Cosmere has a big enough fan base already that there will be enough people watching, I imagine. But ignoring the lore complications, I think Mistborn isn't a difficult adaptation. I actually can't wait to see the aesthetics of it. The dying world, the mist, and the drip. Oh man, I am excited for this one. As soon as we see ash fall from the sky, I just know I'll have a huge smile on my face. One adaptation that isn't going to be nearly as easy is Stormlight. Stormlight Archive is not adaptable. It's just not. 2-year gaps between seasons is now the norm. In fact, sometimes they're even longer. And yes, pandemic this, writer's strike that, but this problem is just not going away. And part of this is because studios are apparently waiting for initial streaming numbers to come in before committing to another season. Now, I'm not a super smart businessman, but I am a consumer, and I have a long list of shows that I've basically stopped watching, not even because they're bad, but because I'm thinking, what happened 3 years ago when I last watched that? I don't remember. And if your business model requires people to watch recap videos created on YouTube, that's a stupid business model. Anyway, what was I talking about? Alright, let's imagine that they started filming The Way of Kings today, and the first season came out in 2028. And now let's have a 2-year gap between seasons, and that is me being incredibly generous because we have these sorts of gaps for shows that are just people talking in rooms. The amount of post-production that Stormlight Archive will require is actually crazy to think about. But let's stick with 2 years. That means that Season 10, based on the final book of the Stormlight Archive, will come out in 2046. Now, can you tell me with complete honesty that you know for a fact you will be a fan of the Stormlight Archive 20 years from now? What was your favorite thing back in 2006? Do you still like that? Back then, I lived and breathed Harry Potter. They're rebooting it this year, and I straight up do not care. Now, there will be people who stick with the Cosmere for that long. Hell, I'm still a fan of A Song of Ice and Fire after that many years, and I probably won't ever stop. This is known as a sunk cost fallacy. Sorry, did I say 10 seasons? Oh, imagine that. See, in addition to having stupidly long breaks between seasons, each season is stupidly short as well. Let's look at some other fantasy shows. The Wheel of Time, The Rings of Power, The Witcher are all 8 episodes a season. House of the Dragon started with 10 and is now 8. The Last of Us started with 9 and is now down to 7. Seriously, imagine trying to cram Wind and Truth into 8 hours. Even if you're one of those people who hated the book and thinks several hundred pages should have been cut out, just what a mess that season's going to be. So I don't think you can adapt the entirety of the Stormlight Archive. I don't know, maybe Brandon is going to try and convince them to do longer seasons. He does apparently have unprecedented creative control over the adaptations, but to what extent? At some point the suits will say no. Personally, I think you just adapt the first 5 books, maybe like 7 seasons. Even that's going to be more than a decade, but I think you can make it work if it's really successful. The question is, if the Stormlight Archive show doesn't reach the end of the books, I imagine Mistborn doesn't get adapted to the end either. So if we're not reaching the climax of the Cosmere, what will this franchise be building to? What will be the endpoint? And what gets cut out? There is a piece of lore in the original Mistborn that noblemen would basically have their way with ska women and then kill them afterwards. And I couldn't find the quote. I think it was in his podcast, but I remember Sanderson saying that he regrets putting this in the story. So I imagine that the Mistborn movie won't include this. But this raises the question, if he's writing the scripts, he can basically tweak his own story, improve the parts that he thinks need improving. Makes you wonder what else he might get rid of. And I feel like that can be a slippery slope. Fans might start to wonder, is the adaptation now the canon version of Sanderson, if he can change or take out anything he wants? But I also wonder if he might start tweaking the parts that people weren't crazy about. Will the middle third of Rhythm of War be really sped up? Will Lift and Zane just get deleted from their respective stories? Who knows? In turn, I wonder if the show will affect the later books as well. Will we see certain characters start to get written differently, more like their show counterparts? It's hard to say. But regardless, there is an opportunity here to streamline the story and trim off some of the fat. While Sanderson's publishers seem to have no problem with the books approaching near unbindable length, I imagine the executives at Apple might want to make the experience a bit leaner. And if we're not adapting everything, that begs the question, which stories get left out completely? I feel like Warbreaker needs to be adapted before Words of Radiance, since Nightblood, Zahel, and Vivenna all appear in it. Of course, Warbreaker was never absolutely mandatory to read before Words of Radiance. I actually read it much later, but I don't think that would be an option here. I would love to see Elantris adapted, since it's incredibly underrated by the community. Elantris is better than Oathbringer, don't at me, and I'm sure there's some sentiment there since it was the first book that Sanderson was actually able to publish. But then after that, do you do all the secret projects? Just some of them? Only the ones that Hoyt appears in? Do you do novellas like Emperor's Soul or Shadow of Silence? And then do you make these mandatory viewing? Again, that brings up the issue of casual audiences who aren't gonna want to do homework. Think of the amount of people who still like the Avengers but only watch the movies and don't watch like 8 TV shows every year. And what does that mean for Easter eggs? One of the first interludes in the Stormlight Archive has Demo, Galadin, and Bayon looking for Hoyt. Are we going to include that? This scene will mean nothing to the majority of people watching it, and I doubt anyone who hasn't read the books is going to be pointing at their screens like Leo and making the connection that these are characters from other stories. And what about other Easter eggs? Are we going to have world hoppers and different forms of investiture pop up in multiple stories? At what point does this become too convoluted for the average person? And I'll be the first one to say, who cares? Make the story for the fans, don't pander to casuals. But unfortunately, that's not how the people in the expensive suits are going to look at this. My least favorite type of fantasy fan are people who say Sanderson should finish A Song of Ice and Fire. Even setting aside the fact that this discussion is in very poor taste, it just screams, I only know 2 authors. Sanderson doesn't really like A Song of Ice and Fire, and his writing style just would not work with this story. I think it would be incredibly jarring. But I bring this up because there is a hidden, lurking threat in the Cosmere being adapted. A sort of phantom menace, if you will. As I recapped earlier, Sanderson is halfway through the Stormlight Archive and hopefully halfway through Mistborn, so it looks like the Cosmere is going to take at least another 20 years. Sanderson could easily be in his early 70s when he finishes. I remember when he announced the first batch of secret projects back a couple of years ago, he hyped up the day before there was going to be a huge announcement, and I thought it was actually going to be the opposite. I thought he was going to be announcing that he was scaling the Cosmere down because it was just too ambitious. But no. Now, in addition to this packed writing schedule that's going to last decades, he's also going to be involved with the shows. He's going to spend the next few months writing the script for Mistborn, taking a break from writing the actual Mistborn books. For years, people joke that Sanderson is kind of like the anti-George R.R. Martin in terms of writing speed, and now there is the possibility that Sanderson will actually replicate him. Is it possible that his focus will shift from books to TV shows? Could Sanderson join George R.R. Martin, Patrick Rothfuss, and Scott Lynch in the pantheon of authors who didn't finish their series? I don't want that to happen, but I won't lie that the cynical part of me thinks it would be so funny. Remember when that woman heckled George at the panel last summer and told him he should let Sanderson finish because he doesn't have a lot of time left? Yeah, it'd be worth it just for that person's reaction. I know this video has probably come off as very pessimistic, but the point I'm trying to make is that imagine if Apple TV canceled the Cosmere after like Rhythm of War or Shadows of Self, like that would kind of suck. So if it's unlikely that the entire Cosmere is adapted, Sanderson needs to think of where a potential ending could be. While Wind and Truth can technically work as an ending if it's tweaked to focus more on the character arcs of Kaladin, Dalinar, Shallan, and Adolin, there's still the issue that Wind and Truth's ending basically sets up a later confrontation with Retribution, and the TV show just might not get to that. Is the easiest solution to just make the story separate. Stormlight is characters on one planet using one magic system to fight one evil shard, Mistborn is characters on another planet using another magic system to fight another evil shard, and here's a few standalone stories sprinkled in between. It's even trickier to think about where to end a Mistborn adaptation. Like, doing just Era 1 would be easiest, as I don't believe Era 2 was nearly as strong, but do we go past that? Do we do Era 3? Are casual fans going to watch the 9th or 10th Mistborn movie? I suppose it all comes down to just how much control Sanderson is going to have. Despite these questions and concerns, I do hope he pulls off whatever he's hoping to pull off here, and I'd love to watch him call the studio's bluff regarding just how much power they give him. But on the flip side, I do worry about Sanderson having too much creative control, especially given the Stormlight Archive. The response to Rhythm of War was really mixed given how long the book was compared to how much actually happened, and the fact that he seemed to just double down and make the next book even longer makes me worried about the future of the written Cosmere as well. I guess we'll have to see, and besides, it'll probably be several years before we actually see a finished product here, and since the early Mistborn and Stormlight books are, in my opinion, his strongest work, at least we'll get to see those adapted properly, so that'll be cool. Anyway, thanks for watching, and let me know down below if you think a full Cosmere adaptation is possible, and if not, what cuts you think will have to be made.